What happens when we die? Dr. Bruce Greyson's Life After Death will change how you live. What if death isn't the end, but the beginning of something we're only just beginning to understand? Dr. Bruce Greyson, a respected psychiatrist and professor emeritus at the University of Virginia, has spent over 4 decades researching near-death experiences, NDEs. His book, After, a doctor explores what near-death experiences reveal about life and beyond, isn't some mystical ramble. It's a deeply scientific journey into the moments when life teeters at the edge of death. Dr. Greyson began his journey as a skeptic. In fact, his first exposure to an NDE came by accident. He was on call in a hospital when a patient described floating above her body and accurately recounted details of an event that happened when she was unconscious. It shook him. He had no explanation. That one story became hundreds, and then thousands. Here's the first revelation. People across cultures, religions, ages, and belief systems describe similar things: leaving their bodies, encountering a bright light, meeting deceased relatives, experiencing an overwhelming sense of peace. These aren't hallucinations triggered by dying brains, Dr. Greyson argues. In fact, many of these patients had no brain activity at the time. Flat EEGs. Clinically dead, yet fully aware. In one documented case, a woman named Pam Reynolds underwent a rare brain surgery called a standstill operation. Her blood was drained from her head, her body temperature lowered to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and her brain shut down entirely. No heartbeat, no electrical activity, nothing. But when she came back, she recalled the tools used, conversations held, and even described a bone saw. Her eyes were taped shut. Her ears were filled with molded speakers. She shouldn't have known any of it. Dr. Greyson isn't saying this proves the afterlife. He's careful, precise. I don't know what happens after we die, he writes, but I do know that something happens. And that something challenges everything we assume about the mind and the body. Another insight, these near-death experiences change people, radically and permanently. Many report losing their fear of death. Some become more spiritual, more compassionate, more present. Material concerns, money, status, ego, fade into the background. People who had been angry, selfish, even violent, sometimes return with a renewed sense of peace and purpose. One patient described it like this: I knew I was part of something infinite, not just observing the universe, but being the universe. Another said, it was more real than anything I've ever felt on Earth. Here's the paradox. The most vivid moments of life seem to occur during death. Greyson dives into the neurology and physiology of dying, comparing brain scans, chemical reactions, and consciousness states. He explores theories. Are these experiences caused by a lack of oxygen? A dying brain releasing DMT? Psychological reactions to trauma? He debunks each with meticulous case studies and peer-reviewed research. Patients under anesthesia, patients without brains functioning, patients who described details from another room. The data speaks louder than any theory. In one striking chapter, Greyson describes a blind woman who had never seen light in her life. Yet during her NDE, she saw herself, saw colors, people, and a landscape. When asked how she knew what colors were, she simply said, I just did. It made sense there. How do you explain sight without eyes? Greyson also looks at terminal lucidity, the phenomenon where patients with Alzheimer's or brain damage suddenly regain clarity and coherence moments before death. They speak, recognize loved ones, even joke. He asks, if memory is stored in a decaying brain, how do they retrieve it at the end? Is consciousness bigger than the brain? He doesn't preach. That's the power of this book. Dr. Greyson invites curiosity, not conclusions. He shares the evidence and lets the reader wonder. In his words, I don't expect you to believe in life after death. I didn't believe it myself, but I couldn't ignore the facts. Here's another fact. Patients aren't hallucinating. They're recalling things they shouldn't know. A man who floated outside his body recalled the color of the nurse's shoelaces. Another described a coin on top of a high shelf he couldn't have seen from his bed. When staff checked later, the coin was there. What about religion? Surprisingly, NDEs are not tied to belief systems. Atheists have them. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, Hindus all describe similar core experiences. The interpretation varies, but the structure is eerily consistent. A separation from the body, a tunnel or journey, a light or presence, a life review, and then a choice or command to return. The Life Review is one of the most fascinating revelations. Patients describe reliving their lives, not from their perspective, but from the perspective of others. One man who bullied a classmate in childhood said he felt the victim's pain, shame, and fear. Another woman who had been indifferent to her children's emotions said she experienced the sadness they felt because of her distance. Greyson calls this the empathy mirror. It suggests a moral component embedded in consciousness, something no pill, scan, or surgery can explain. So what does this mean for us, the living? Greyson's conclusion is simple but profound. If consciousness continues after death, or even if it detaches temporarily, then we are not just brains. We are more than cells and synapses. Life is not just biology, it's mystery. And that changes everything. People who've had NDEs return with a deep sense of connection to others, to nature, to a higher presence. Many become less materialistic, more service-oriented, and more forgiving. One former investment banker gave up his career to volunteer full-time. "Nothing I bought ever felt like that light," he told Greyson. Here's a quote that lingers. "The most important thing in life," one patient said, "is how we treat each other." No theological doctrine, just kindness. That's what death taught him. Even for non-believers, this book is powerful. It opens the door to scientific humility. What if we don't have all the answers? What if death isn't the end, but a transition? Greyson never claims certainty, but his data demands attention. After is not a religious book. It's not a ghost story. It's a medical doctor's investigation into experiences that defy medicine. Every chapter contains real stories, real people, and real change. Dr. Greyson ends the book with a question, not an answer. If our minds are not limited to our brains, what else is possible? And maybe that's the ultimate takeaway. Not proof, but possibility. Not dogma, but wonder. This is Intellings.